Think about James Brown belting out, "It's a man's world." That song sold millions. Makes you wonder what people were connecting with back then, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does.
Because today, we're plunging into a book that, well, really flips that idea on its head. Understanding the Purpose and Power of Women by Myles Munroe.
Mhm.
Now, this isn't just another chat about, who does what around the house. We're digging into the fundamental reasons why we're here, focusing specifically on the inherent design and intended purpose of women, according to this really thought-provoking work.
And what immediately stands out, I think, is the personal conviction behind Monroe's writing. He dedicates it to his wife, Ruth,
Right.
clearly seeing her as living proof of the principles he explores. He also acknowledges his daughter, his sisters, and, significantly, the struggles faced by women in developing nations.
So it's grounded in reality for him.
Exactly. This isn't just theory. It's rooted in real-world observation and, a deep desire for everyone to understand their inherent worth. He also expresses gratitude to his late mother, his children, his editor, and the women at Bahamas Faith International Fellowship.
Okay, so let's get into the core of it then. Munroe points out that for a long time, right, across different cultures, women have been seen as less than, holding a secondary place.
That historical context is important.
He even shares this anecdote about men confidently proclaiming, "Woman, do you know who I am? I'm the one who wears the pants around here."
Yeah, you hear that, and
It almost sounds like a punchline now, but that underlying belief in male superiority is precisely what the book aims to, well, dismantle.
this brings up a really interesting point about how we even think about our entitlements.
Hmm.
Monroe suggests that constantly demanding rights might unintentionally imply that those rights aren't ours to begin with.
How so? Explain that a bit.
Well, he uses historical examples like race relations and the dynamic between men and women to illustrate this idea that constantly asking for something can inadvertently give the power of ownership to the other party, like you're asking permission for what's already yours.
Huh. That's a fascinating angle to consider. It's like that analogy he uses about a car.
Oh yeah, the car.
If your car isn't running right, you need to figure out what it needs, fuel, maintenance, whatever, not just try to force it to work based on what you think it should need.
Right, like pouring soda in the gas tank because you're thirsty.
Exactly. It's about understanding its inherent design to get it functioning properly.
Precisely. And this idea of inherent design leads us directly to Monroe's 7 principles of purpose, which really form the backbone of his argument.
Okay, what are they?
Well, he lays them out like this. First, God is a God of purpose. He operates with intention. Second, God created everything with a purpose. Third, not every purpose is known, or immediately obvious anyway.
Right, makes sense.
Fourth, and this is crucial, where purpose is not known, abuse is inevitable. Fifth, you need to ask the creator, not the creation, to understand the purpose.
Go to the source.
Go to the source. Sixth, purpose is found in the mind of the maker. And seventh, ultimately, understanding God's purpose is the key to fulfillment.
Okay, so purpose is central. And here's where it gets really thought-provoking, because Munroe actually cautions against looking to, quick fixes and superficial advice.
Like from talk shows.
Yeah, talk shows, magazines, for understanding something as fundamental as relationships. He emphasizes going back to the original blueprint, so to speak.
And he makes a crucial point about personal responsibility, too. He explains that we experience the consequences of our actions. Like someone who drinks poison suffers the natural result.
It's cause and effect.
Right. He clarifies that negative influences don't force our hand, but rather they exploit the choices we make. The real issue, according to the book, isn't some external pressure forcing you, but our own ignorance or rejection of God's intended purpose. That's what leads to harm for ourselves and for others.
So when we zoom out then and look at humanity as a whole, what's the big picture according to Munroe?
He proposes 2 main overarching purposes. First, our relationship with the divine.
Okay.
And second, vocation, which is our life work, the specific work we're designed to do. He stresses that being created in God's image and likeness means, at its core, that God made beings capable of love, drawing from his own essence as spirit.
Right. Beings he could relate to.
Exactly. And what's particularly insightful is how he explains the creation of woman in this context. He describes the initial state of the first man, the male man as he puts it, as one of solitude. And while the animals offered companionship, they couldn't truly meet his need for love because, well, they weren't of the same fundamental nature or essence.
Different kind of being.
Different kind of being. So the woman, the female man, was created out of that need for love, with her primary purpose being to be loved by the male. Dominion, he argues, while important, was actually secondary for her creation.
Interesting. So the primary driver was love. And this foundational difference in primary focus, the need to be loved versus the initial state of being alone that shapes the distinct natures, designs, and inherent needs of both men and women.
That's his point. It explains where we overlap and where we naturally differ.
And it's vital then to grasp Munroe's central point here. God created men and women equal,
Equal in value and worth, absolutely.
but also with distinct differences in design and purpose. When the first man declared, "This is now bone of my bones," Munroe sees this as a powerful affirmation of that shared essence and equality.
Exactly. A recognition of sameness.
Now, about those passages that talk about curses after things went wrong, Munroe offers a really interesting interpretation there.
Yeah, he does. He suggests these weren't divine punishments hurled down from above, but rather the natural consequences of stepping outside of God's intended design.
Like the poison analogy again?
Sort of, yeah. He points out that it was the ground that was cursed, not the man or the woman directly, and that the ability to have children was actually part of the original purpose, before any disruption,
Okay.
with the consequence being pain associated with childbirth, not the ability itself being a curse.
That perspective really reframes those often cited scriptures, doesn't it?
It certainly does. He also touches on the critical role of direct, honest communication in relationships, noting our tendency to avoid genuine connection by, hiding behind a spiritual facade instead of dealing with each other face to face. He even shares personally that his own relationship with the divine is directly linked to how he treats his wife.
Wow. Okay. And the concept of submission. This can be a real lightning rod for discussion.
Oh, absolutely. Munroe presents it not as a forced subservience, but as a conscious choice,
A choice based on what?
based on understanding one's purpose, which in turn empowers the husband to fulfill his role as a leader.
Right.
He uses that analogy of car tires.
Yeah.
Okay, can't all be the steering wheel.
Right. Different functions.
Different functions. He connects the resistance to this idea with a negative spirit towards authority generally, and points to Jesus' own willing submission to the Father as the ultimate example.
Not forced, but aligned with purpose.
Exactly. And he also gives specific guidance, suggesting that women in challenging marriages focus on their position while urging husbands to be accountable to a higher moral authority. He references the story of Esther's strategic wisdom there.
Oh.
The overarching message is really about recognizing and valuing the unique contributions and strengths that women bring.
That leads us to this idea of women and men being interdependent then, drawing from the Apostle Paul's writings.
Right, 1 Corinthians.
Munroe emphasizes that in a spiritual sense, neither man nor woman is truly independent of the other. He highlights the natural cycle of life through birth and affirms their equal footing before the divine.
Yeah, and Chapter 4, as Munroe summarizes it, lays out 10 fundamental principles regarding the nature and role of women. Things like their inherent spiritual freedom, their connection to their source, and the necessity of mutual love and respect within the framework of God's overall intentions. He then sets the stage for exploring the specific purposes of women in the subsequent chapters, promising encouragement for women and greater understanding for men.
Okay, so let's look at some of those specific purposes. One key one he explores is the woman as an enhancer.
Right, the helper role.
Munroe defines this as her being a helper perfectly suited to the man, designed to adapt to his vision and purpose.
He uses that plant and soil analogy.
Yes, tell us about that.
Like a plant adapts to the soil it's in, he suggests the woman adapts to her environment, which is the man she's connected to, and draws nourishment from that connection.
Okay. What's really important to understand here, though,
Yeah, the nuance is key. While adapt can also be translated as submit, Munroe clarifies that this adaptation, this submission, should be to a man's moral and spiritual integrity.
so it's conditional.
He doesn't shy away from stating that not every man warrants that kind of adaptation. He makes it clear that being a helper doesn't imply being inferior at all, but rather being a vital co-leader in achieving a shared vision.
Co-leader. That's important. He also tackles this idea that sometimes women's gifts are seen as competitive with men,
Right, when they're meant to be supportive.
emphasizing that those gifts are fundamentally intended to be supportive. He even touches on the dynamic where a woman's attempts to assist can sometimes be misinterpreted by men as nagging,
Chuckles. Yeah, that sounds familiar.
using the relatable example of a wife gently reminding her husband about spiritual practices.
And the biblical story of Sarah trying to help Abraham have a child?
Yeah.
That really underscores this point, too. It shows that sometimes our attempts to help, if they're not in line with the broader plan and timing, can actually lead to more complications and conflict. Trying too hard, maybe.
Right, good intentions, but maybe misplaced timing or method. Okay, another crucial purpose Monroe discusses is the woman as a reflector.
Yes. He explains that just as humanity as a whole is meant to reflect God's nature, the woman is specifically designed to reflect the nature of the man she's connected to.
And love is the key here.
Love is the catalyst, absolutely. He emphasizes that when a woman feels genuinely loved, she truly flourishes, comes alive, as he puts it.
And conversely.
Conversely, a lack of authentic love can have a really detrimental effect. It can short-circuit her, is the phrase he uses.
Wow.
And interestingly, the scriptures often instruct women to respect and honor men, while commanding men to love women. Munroe explains this by suggesting the fall, the disruption. It damaged men's natural inclination to love and women's natural inclination to respect, so these specific directives became necessary for restoration.
So it's like a corrective instruction. He points out that a woman will essentially mirror the love or the absence of love she experiences.
Directly impacting her inner peace and joy.
Yeah. And according to the book, neglecting this fundamental need is, well, misusing God's intended purpose for women. He highlights the importance of men consistently expressing love through both words and actions.
Which can be a challenge sometimes.
Acknowledging the difference between a more logical male approach, perhaps, and a more emotionally attuned female interpretation.
That anecdote about wedding vows really brings this difference into sharp focus, doesn't it? The different needs for expression.
It really does. Monroe also emphasizes that men in positions of influence can significantly boost a woman's self-worth just by valuing her contributions and treating her with consistent kindness and respect.
Which makes perfect sense. He then draws a parallel between a woman reflecting her husband and the church reflecting the nature of Christ.
The bride of Christ analogy.
Exactly. Even referring to marriage as a vital foundation, like a church within the church.
And that original call to have dominion over the earth that we talked about earlier, how does that connect?
Munroe explains that through the teachings of Christ, this call extends to the church actively shaping the world for good. So healthy relationships become part of fulfilling this larger purpose.
Got it. Okay, shifting gears slightly to the woman as life giver, Monroe expands this concept beyond just biological birth, right?
Way beyond. He introduces the idea of a woman as an incubator in multiple realms. Physical, yes, but also emotional, mental, instinctual, and even spiritual.
An incubator.
And the key here isn't just passively receiving, but actively transforming what she receives. That's the core of incubation.
He stresses this principle that a womb, in all its forms, multiplies what it takes in. It never returns exactly what was given.
Exactly. It develops it, nurtures it. He then outlines 8 specific ways in which a woman incubates.
8 ways, okay. And this has significant implications, as Monroe points out, for men to be incredibly mindful.
Oh, definitely. Mindful of their words, their actions towards women, knowing the potential for those things to be nurtured and developed, for good or bad.
Can you give some examples?
Sure. He provides some really clear ones. Give seed, get a baby, provide shelter, create a home, supply ingredients, get a meal, offer a simple smile.
It can blossom into heartfelt affection.
Right. He encourages sharing ideas and prayer requests with women because of this inherent capacity they have to cultivate and bring forth solutions.
What about the emotional side?
The womb of emotions example is powerful, where held on to bitterness, maybe from years ago, can suddenly manifest like it's being delivered.
Ooh, that rings true. He also emphasizes the lasting impact of negative words,
Reminding us that women often hold on to these deeply. He references a passage from Isaiah about a mother not forgetting.
and the mental or instinctual womb.
That speaks to the nurturing and intuitive nature often found in women. And the spiritual womb suggests that if a man has something he wants earnestly prayed over, telling a woman is a good idea because of that incubating ability.
So many layers to that life-giving concept. The book then delves into the complexities of understanding women's communication styles.
Which, as we know, can be a source of misunderstanding.
Absolutely. Acknowledging the potential for crossed wires arising from these inherent differences in purpose and design, he emphasizes the crucial need for patience, forgiveness, consideration, mutual love, and respect.
Yeah, basically the foundations for any good relationship.
Monroe explains how a woman's broader perspective, what he calls peripheral vision, can be a real asset to a man often focused on a singular goal.
While his more linear, direct thinking can help her avoid feeling overwhelmed by too many things at once.
Right. He underscores that these differences aren't meant to cause conflict, but rather to complement each other. Neither style is inherently superior.
And he addresses the common misconception that men lack emotions.
Oh yeah, the stoic man stereotype.
Right. He clarifies that while they might not express them as readily, maybe because their design often prioritizes logic and leadership or crises, the emotions are certainly present. He stresses the importance of men consciously communicating their thoughts and feelings.
And for women,
For women to avoid misinterpreting a less overtly emotional response as a lack of caring.
the contrasting examples he uses, Polites' wife's insightful dream versus Moses' focused leadership at the Red Sea, they really highlight these different approaches, don't they?
They do. Munroe points out that what a woman communicates often reflects how she feels, whereas what a man says typically reflects what he thinks,
That's a key distinction. The "do you still love me" question is a classic example of this difference,
leading to that observation, when Jane's happy, Tarzan's happy.
highlighting the interconnectedness of their well-being.
He cautions against jumping to conclusions about each other's motivations and how communication breakdowns can create this damaging cycle in relationships.
So what's the practical advice?
For men, think before you speak to women. Consider the emotional impact. For women, try to articulate your thoughts clearly, not just your feelings, when communicating with men, because that's often how they process information.
And finally, on communication, he explains why women tend to recall details more readily, while men often focus on the main point.
Using the wedding day example again. She remembers the color of the napkins. He remembers they got married.
Chuckles. Right. He also discusses the tendency for women to remember and men to maybe need reminders, linking this back to their inherent purposes and designs. Women remembering details, men focusing on the bottom line.
And he concludes this section with a powerful reminder to cultivate patience, kindness, and consideration in all interactions, striving to reflect Christ-like behavior.
Which is always good advice. This understanding of communication naturally leads to a discussion of the fundamental needs of men and women.
Which Munroe emphasizes are deeply connected to their inherent purposes and designs. He states it pretty plainly. The primary need of a woman is to feel loved.
And the primary need of a man.
Is to feel respected.
Okay. He clarifies that fulfilling a man's deep-seated need for respect is crucial for his overall satisfaction in a relationship, maybe even more than overt expressions of love sometimes.
While conversely, a husband has a fundamental responsibility to consistently love and cherish his wife. It's a two-way street, meeting those primary needs.
He even offers advice for women whose husbands might not yet fully grasp how to express love effectively.
Yeah, encouraging patience and responding in ways the husband can currently understand, not expecting something he's not yet capable of giving.
What about practical guidance on improving communication in this area?
He suggests men should strive to be courteous, open, willing to share their thoughts and feelings, and women should actively take an interest in the pursuits and passions of their husbands.
Shared activities.
Yes, he highlights the importance of shared recreational activities for men, rooted in their protector and territorial instincts maybe, and their desire for shared accomplishment, for winning together. He encourages women to participate in these activities to deepen connection.
And the woman's need for affection.
Underscored as integral to her very being. Munroe explains that for women, affection often creates the emotional intimacy necessary for deeper connection, including sexual intimacy in marriage.
Which might differ from a man's perspective.
It can, yeah. He contrasts this with men whose focus might more immediately be on the physical aspect. He stresses the importance of men prioritizing affection as a precursor to intimacy, understanding her needs.
He reiterates that a lack of understanding in these areas, needs, communication, can lead to significant relationship challenges.
Absolutely, and reaffirms the Bible as a valuable guide, an instruction manual, if you will, for understanding and meeting each other's fundamental needs.
Okay, the final major theme revolves around the potent power of influence.
Right. He distinguishes between position power, like authority, and influence power, the ability to sway others. He notes the historical example in Genesis of influence being targeted, Eve, to affect authority.
Adam, how does he interpret God's guidance after that, regarding the woman's desire for her husband and his ruling over her?
He sees it not as a harsh dominance, but more like a framework for order, a regulation. Just as life's inherent challenges, like working the difficult ground, can be seen as ruling the man in certain ways.
So not necessarily a negative hierarchy.
Not in the sense of oppression, no.
Yeah.
He emphasizes that a woman's influence is a quiet yet incredibly powerful force, operating even in private. It's a gift intended for positive impact.
but with potential for misuse.
Definitely. He provides those historical examples of influence gone wrong. Adam influenced by Eve, Abraham influenced by Sarah's impatience, Samson influenced by Delilah.
Showing the power it holds.
Exactly. Monroe firmly believes that through the redemptive work of Christ, God desires to restore women to their full potential as influential partners, not as subordinates. He clarifies that the term helper doesn't equate to servitude.
Like the Holy Spirit.
Precisely. He draws that parallel to the Holy Spirit, who is also described as a helper, comforter, counselor, and guide. It's a position of strength and support.
He discusses Adam's responsibility to protect and guide Eve with divine wisdom.
And his failure to do so, abandoning her, essentially, and joining her in disobedience. He contrasts this with Jesus, the ultimate example, the perfect Adam who will never abandon his church.
And connects the woman's role as helper to the man with the church's role in assisting Christ in his mission.
Yes, extending that helper principle to the collective mission.
Finally, he addresses the writings of the Apostle Paul on women in leadership. That can be tricky territory.
It can. He suggests they need to be interpreted within the context of both God's overarching purpose and design and the specific cultural norms of that time. He acknowledges the tension, between spiritual equality in Christ and those cultural considerations.
But he reminds us that Jesus himself consistently affirmed and valued women throughout his ministry.
Unequivocally, yes.
Okay, so the book culminates with a look at the woman described in Proverbs 31.
Right. Presented as the ultimate embodiment, the epitome of the purpose and power of women discussed throughout the book.
Munroe contrasts the world's often performance-based view of worth, what you do,
with the Bible's emphasis on inherent worth found in Christ. You don't have to justify your existence through activity.
So, this exemplary woman in Proverbs, she knows her purpose within God's plan.
That's the idea. He highlights specific examples from the text. Her trust in the divine, her wise use of her abilities, her care for her household, her engagement in business and enterprise. She's active and purposeful.
And he encourages each listener, each one of you, to discover and utilize your own unique, God-given talents to be a blessing to others.
Ultimately, Munroe concludes by emphasizing that our true life and identity are found in our connection with Christ. Our ultimate place, he says, is with and in him.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Myles Munroe's Understanding the Purpose and Power of Women, we've explored his perspective on the intended design and purpose for women, and really by extension for all of humanity.
Yeah, key insights include those vital concepts of equality and distinctness, the fundamental needs for love and respect in relationships, the profound impact of influence, and that inspiring model of the Proverbs 31 woman.
And for you, our listener, grasping these principles can be incredibly valuable. It provides a framework, maybe, for fostering healthier relationships, developing a deeper understanding of yourself and others.
And perhaps challenging some limiting beliefs you might hold about the roles and inherent worth of both women and men.
This brings us to a final thought for you to consider. Reflect on how your own understanding may be shaped by society, culture, or personal experiences aligns with the principles we've discussed today from this source.
And maybe ask yourself, what's one step you could take to further explore your own intended purpose and perhaps re-examine some of those long-held beliefs? Something to think about.